I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Podcast For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader and explore how they speak to their moment. In this one, show is hosted by two guys, and one of the guys, my name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys, my name is Ian Ryan. We have a very special moment today. I think film in cinematic history, this is a bizarre moment. Yeah. We also have a Holy Trinity guest appearance.
Oh, no.
That already happened.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, you're right. We do. We'll have to ask our guest if he is Father, Son, Holy Ghost, where he's at on the little triangle there.
Where he's at today. I think we all can be, on any given day, we might find ourselves being the Holy Ghost. I was also wondering if people might ask themselves, do we not like Chad, given the films that we bring him on for? Do we have something against Chad?
Chad, I think, requested this. I did,
yes. Okay. I figured I would be the only person that would want to actually talk about this movie.
I mean, honestly, you're an ideal person to talk about this, given your professional expertise. But shut up, you're not introduced yet.
How dare you? Yeah, this was like a day in film class for me, this exercise and watching these two films. Very strange experience.
I took a film class at UCLA, and there was a guy in it who was an international student from Japan who had a lot to share with the class and a lot to say, and I appreciated him very much. He pronounced the word audience as audience.
Ooh,
and that'll just stick with me for the rest of my life.
Beautiful.
He had a very mellifluous voice. Show's hosted by two guys. I'm one of the guys. My name is Jake Serwin. Did I say that?
You did, but...
Okay. Well, the demon Pazuzu has gotten into my podcast soundboard,
and it might be your damn wife. Sometimes the demon Pazuzu is your wife. We'll get to that.
You leave her out of this.
Okay.
Son of a bitch.
I feel I have to explain so I don't get in trouble with your wonderful podcast girlfriend and my friend, which is that Mary Beth Hurt did the voice of Pazuzu sometimes. So when I said that stuff about Pazuzu being your wife, I actually was not referring to my dear friend.
Forgot that part, and so I was simply confused.
I was wondering why you absolutely did the opposite of an alley-oop, took the basketball and put it in a trash can on your way out the door instead of helping me. Yeah.
So, but that's a secret 3-point hoop.
Okay.
The trash can. So
nobody knows about that.
Real quick, if you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe to our Patreon, where for $5 a month you'll get a bonus episode every other week covering Clint Eastwood movies and Paul Schrader adjacent stuff. We've introduced Schrader to that whole mess, and it's my understanding that your mother subscribes to our Patreon in hell. Little joke I thought of. Hey, come on. Pea soup. That's what Ian does. Our guest today is a director and producer.
My God.
A 3-time guest on the show. He's in the Three Timers Club. He's getting a little jacket.
Yep.
We're so excited to have him. Chad Harbold, welcome back to the show. How you doing, Chad?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back on. I've been enjoying all the Pauled casts so far.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you.
And who would you say of the two co-hosts is in the lead in terms of just overall?
This is one of those funny jokes that Jake is waiting for the answer to.
No, I'm terrified by the answer to this.
Well,
do not.
I'm afraid that the mosquito that bits Ian might be the winner.
That's true. At least two extremely easily defeated co-hosts by one of the lowest beasts on God's earth. Yep.
Yeah, I'm so sleepy lately.
Yep.
I've had a rough week at work in terms of just physical labor, and yet my coworkers who have been doing the same stuff all seem fine. So
who knows what's going on?
Older than me. Yeah. Who knows what's going on? Let's get right into it. First of all, we have something to talk about. Now, I made a mistake, and that mistake was...
You texted this to me earlier, but you did reveal that you watched Dominion's movie for this episode.
Okay, hold on. Past guest of the show, Jamie Loftus, had a whole bit about Jurassic World Dominions. And so she's funnier than us, more successful than us, deservedly so. And so she gets, I would say, Dominion over...
You're right.
The joke of Dominion and Dominions.
I wasn't aware of this. I did see that this week, I believe she went to see the new Despicable Me film, and she had a lot of commentary about various Dominion-themed foods that were on offer at the theater, which is great.
I can think of one that they don't usually have there. But honestly, a banana, incredible movie theater snack because it's silent. The only problem is people leaving the peel.
Yeah.
You know, be funny getting out of there.
People love those little guys.
They do. Chad, have you seen the Minions films?
No, I've only seen I've only seen the first Despicable Me.
Same.
But I enjoy whenever they pop up on unrelated news broadcasts.
Yeah, I like them as I feel like I like them more as the Facebook meme than I do as
right.
I find them kind of annoying.
They're now pretty popular Times Square costume people.
Of course.
As well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They've replaced the Scary Elmo guy or whatever.
Yeah, it's
the
mostly
cowboy.
superheroes and minions now. Much like the American cinema.
Hey, freaking got 'em. You guys see any of this stuff as we record this? It's, of course, D23 weekend. You guys see any of this stuff coming out of D23?
Yeah, I mostly just paying attention to Avatar news. We have a new title, which...
Yeah, the seed bearer, friendship ended with the seed bearer. Fire and Ash is my new best friend.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I'm for this. The seed bearer is...
what were we thinking?
But at the same time, I like him at his corniest and most ridiculous.
Sure.
But yeah, I think we're trying to get to $3 billion here. We can't be bearing seeds, you know?
Exactly. And
isn't that kind of your job, Ian? Like your like sustainable farming?
Bearing?
That is kind of seed bearing,
That's
right?
I was about to come down really hard on seed bearer, but I guess I am the seed bearer. Oh no. That's not good.
I was about to come really hard, something Ian just said. Anyway, speaking of which, so the mistake I made, I found myself on some kind of Clint Eastwood forum reading about our podcast. And
yeah, I told you that I didn't want to know about this, and you're insisting, so it better be good.
Here's the only thing I'm going to say. Their complaints, to my surprise, were not like, these are woke soy boys or whatever. Their complaint was that we talked about ourselves too much, which I would like to argue is the point of a podcast.
Oh,
like
I am unfortunately taking the sides of these absolute forum freaks.
No. All podcasts tend toward like autobiographical minutia of the hosts. The ideally by episode whatever 500 of this show, we will not prepare at all. That's my goal. That's what I want. We're not talking about movies anymore.
Films. Yeah.
No.
I have to wonder if you might be drawn to certain podcasts that reflect a desire in yourself. Is that a possibility?
You don't have to wonder that. You can. That's confirmed. It's been confirmed.
Okay.
But anyway,
Great.
For any of those guys listening to this, how come it's not about Clint Eastwood anymore?
That's a good point. Got your asses. Get out of here.
Chad, do you think we talk about ourselves too much?
Well, I was just listening to the Touch episode on a walk this morning and noticed my phone that I don't believe on my phone the title was not mentioned until 25 minutes in, I think. So I guess that's not that bad.
Dominion prequel to The Exorcist.
Yes, I was about to do
Schrader.
it too. Yep. 10 minutes.
Thank you. Well, Chad, we appreciate your feedback. You're a showbiz professional.
He took a huge breath right before he talked, which is what made Jacob really laugh.
Yeah. He covered the microphone with his hand.
Yeah.
But before we talk about Dominion prequel The Exorcist, very quickly, our signature segment, the two questions. No. This is an important part of the show because I feel like, look, I've been in therapy for a long time. That's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is related. That's what they tell me when I talk around my feelings for 10 years. They tell me, no, it's all related. So the two questions are related. I feel like this is inescapably illuminating of whatever mind state the film has brought us to or the state of mind that we brought to the film.
I think this is actually the big-brained aesthetic explanation for why we should talk about ourselves, because when we are talking about how we are experiencing a film, inevitably we are bringing these things to the table. Some critics are dishonest and they don't recognize this. They don't want to acknowledge it, but we are excessively honest. We are,
to paraphrase,
oversharing
the textbook, our podcast ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My grandma had that on the shelf, and I looked at it because there was like a picture of, I don't know, probably like a naked pregnant lady or something, and I was, slim pickings. I was 8 or whatever. Learned a lot. 2 questions. Chad, you got a question for?
Sure. I was wondering, The Exorcist is obviously a horror movie franchise. The first one is, can still, I think, considered to be one of, if not the scariest movie of all time. Do you have a memory of either the first time or the most time that as a kid you were really, really scared of a movie? What was it? And what were the circumstances under, that you watched it?
That's a great question. Ian, I would like for you to go first.
Certainly. I believe I may have referenced it in passing once, but I saw The Shining at my good friend's 13th birthday party. We were doing backyard camping. So immediately following The Shining, we had to go to the tents. And if you needed to go to the bathroom, of course, you're going to need to return inside. And I was just petrified by this possibility. Everything about the film scared me. I can't even try to make some type of claim and say, like, I was tapped into what it meant in cinematic history. No, I just thought it was the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. And for weeks after, here's where we get to talk about ourselves, I had choir practice at 6:30 a.m. So I had to get up at, 6 a.m. and
any
shower.
Professional singers listening to this know that the best time for singing is 6 a.m.
That's right. It's when your voice is muddiest, they say. Yeah. So I would have to take a shower with a window opening onto the outside, as windows do often. And it was dark outside. And I swore to God that I could hear somebody say red rum one of the times that I was taking a shower. Wow. And basically ruined my life for a couple weeks until I just forgot, I guess, was the thing. I didn't figure it out.
I was not expecting
I didn't
this.
Crack it.
I was not expecting this episode to be the origin of Ian not taking a shower. We're learning a lot. That does sound very scary. Sure. How old did you say you were when you saw The Shining?
I think it was 13.
Oh, wow. And who allowed this? I guess that's getting into territory.
I was not crazy. It didn't feel so crazy.
Yeah. That's a frightening one. I first watched The Shining when I had mono in college. And so I was like, I mean, if anything's happening, I can't really go fast, Like I'm get about halfway down the hall and I'm sleepy.
Halfway down that hall. Yeah.
Exactly. I wish. Not going to make any Scatman jokes. Not going to make any Scatman jokes.
Nope.
Chad,
what about you?
Yeah, Chad, please answer the question, Chad.
For me, it was at I was already kind of a movie kid, but it took me longer to become kind of a horror kid. Just because I was definitely kind of a scaredy cat at first, until I kind of forced myself to start watching these, and now I love horror movies. But as a kid, I was at a sleepover and we watched 2 VHSs. One was I Know What You Did Last Summer, and the other was John Carpenter's Vampires.
Wow. Sort of elevated horror then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those were probably the first real horror movies I had seen in the sense that movies that were made kind of with the sole purpose to be scary. I'd probably seen Psycho or something, but which also the end of that is very scary, but I had seen some classic ones, but I don't know. I was so fucking petrified of watching both of those, and afterwards, and everybody else was just very chill about them, and they all went to bed, and I basically just sat up on my sleeping bag, and just kind of looking around, just trying to keep my eye on each door and window for the entire rest of the night.
I think the sleepover is the perfect place because you're already out of your element. You're already kind of on high alert socially, and
and you don't know where all the exits are, and you don't know who's coming in and out. Yeah,
Maybe you don't know exactly what the rules of conduct are. Can I say "dang" here? Can I? Is there a bathroom I'm not allowed to use? That kind of stuff. Already on edge, high alert. Yeah, I have 2 answers to this. The first time I was terrified by a movie, it was E.T. because I saw him and I was very small. And so
Whoa.
I was so fucking scared of ET when I was like 4 or 5. And it was on at like a big party thing with like parents and stuff. And I just had to like skedaddle. Like I just left. I was so freaked out by
You headed home.
Yeah.
You caught a taxi. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. Yeah. I hailed a streetcar.
Mm-hmm.
And then do you have to hail those? I don't think so. Guys on the forum, sound off. And then the first horror movie that I watched, like, you know, movie designed to frighten, was in a similar situation to you guys. Was not a sleepover, but like a big friend hang in 8th grade, co-ed friend hang, or maybe 9th grade.
Oh, okay.
And we put on.
Now we're talking.
Saw.
Yeah. Okay.
And like everybody was, I think, new to horror movies, and so we were all kind of freaking out together, and it was a lot of fun. And it's really funny to think about that, because that movie's not like
it's not particular.
Not
I mean,
scary.
that's the funny thing. Yeah,
and I like it. I enjoy the film, but yeah, you know, there's like a jump scare, and I'm just so unfamiliar with that. I don't know, cinematic syntax that it just freaked the hell out of me.
Sure.
Even though I'm telling myself that Danny Glover is like, you know, also the guy from the Royal Tenenbaums or something. Like, I know this is fake. As a kid, I'm like, Tobin Bell, that's the guy from The Firm.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Chad. That's,
great.
I mean, I feel like The Exorcist is a famous, like, first horror movie as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember too seeing the trailer for the version you've never seen in theaters and being completely freaked out by it. Like before, I had never seen the movie, but was aware of it at that time. But
doesn't it have like heavy breathing in it, or am I thinking of the Alien re-release trailer?
I remember.
I don't remember how it starts, but like it gets pretty. It's like pretty intense. I remember the trailer is, and like I just remember lots of people being freaked out about it, like sitting in there having, you know, going to see a more like, I don't know, seeing like Contact or something, and like that is what was playing.
Yeah, I remember getting angry when they would play a horror movie trailer, like on, I think we've talked about this, but they would play them late at night on Comedy Central a lot, like TV spots for, you know, White Noise with Michael Keaton or whatever. And it's like, I'm trying to watch Conan. Like, I'm not trying to get scared. I'm trying to say haha. Excellent question. Ian, do you have one to post to the group?
If you have one, please go ahead. I think I do know that you do have one, is what I'm actually revealing.
Do. This is a little behind the curtain. I have a little matching game for the boys, basically. Mm-hmm. So this, I think people are probably still surprised to hear that Paul Schrader directed the 4th Exorcist movie.
Right.
You know, Paul Schrader, the taxi driver guy. So, in that spirit, if you were to pick a 70s, well, you don't even have to say auteur, but we can say kind of serious filmmaker, a respected voice of cinema, to direct the next entry in a franchise, not a reboot, the next entry in a horror movie franchise, and they can be dead. It's fine. What's the top of your head? What's the funniest one that comes to the top of mind, or the one that sounds the most genuinely interesting? I'm happy to go first.
Yeah. Why don't you go first?
Done.
Famous podcast girlfriend. I posed this to her. She suggested David Lynch's Nightmare on Elm Street.
You got the dream matchup. Sure,
exactly.
It's a lock. Yep.
And someone we will mention on this episode also directed Nightmare on Elm Street for the Dream matchup. So there you go. It's called The Dream Master, but you said something that sounded like it. So I thought that'd be funny. And then I would say Robert Altman's Final Destination.
Oh,
because it's a bunch of people.
Talking over each other and stuff. Yeah, that'd be really good as they get a log through the windshield, or whatever it was. Barbed wire. What happens in that scene?
I feel like that is our generation's train coming at the screen. Like, I don't think there's anyone our age who doesn't think about that every single time they see a truck with stuff tied down on it.
Yeah. But because actually maybe more useful. I mean, it is kind of a PS. That's not something that never happens. Yeah.
Go ahead and just get out from behind the truck.
Yep.
And that's easy. That's even if it doesn't have stuff tied down to it. I think trucks are, just from a visibility standpoint, it's a good idea to give him a wide berth. Either of you have any ideas here?
Yeah.
I have one, but Chad, please. Yeah.
All right. I'll do kind of a serious one and kind of a joke one, but
Good.
Monty Hellman's Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could be a fun pairing. I mean it's kind of probably what that movie right now is. What's that called? The one with like the serial killer who's like walking around and it's like people are saying it's like a Bellatar movie or whatever.
Oh,
do you know what
I
I'm
don't
talking
know
about?
about this. No.
No.
I
I mean, there's that shot at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre that like tips over into Terrence Malick territory.
For sure. Very beautiful. But like, yeah, I could see, a version that feels something like, two-lane blacktop until the chainsaws come out.
God. Yeah. Incredible.
And then my joke one is Jerry Lewis, Friday the 13th. I think would be a lot of fun. He would, design elaborate gags. Jason could be a perfect kind of silent, like comic character.
That's actually a good idea. That's a really good idea.
I love it. I love it.
And Jerry Lewis and a lot of slasher antagonists, I think, share similar ideas about women.
Yeah, and it could, Jerry, if Jerry's in it but not playing Jason, he's like constantly like falling into girls' boobs around Camp Crystal Lake and avoiding elaborate death traps set by Jason.
Oh,
That'd be fun. Yeah. Ian, what do you got?
I'm going to say John Cassavetes is Hellraiser. And I think the reason that I think this, just a single home, just people going insane and torturing each other. And then maybe the crew doesn't even have to be there. Humans bringing suffering. And then they're just I just sit back and relax for a little while. Sometimes Butterball needs a break, I
will reach out to a friend of the show, Jeremy Allison, to have him do his Peter Falk impression. And I will insert that here now.
Just one more thing. We have such sights to show you.
There it was. I'm sure it was very funny.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
In a Violent Nature is the movie I was going to mention.
Is
Is
that the one?
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that.
I have not seen it, so I don't know if it's actually good or just a movie people are saying is good, but
Yeah.
I heard in Maxine she steps on a guy's balls until it explodes, so that is
accurate. Yes,
okay.
that does happen in the motion picture Maxine.
Interesting. I would watch an animated GIF of that moment. So Ty West, hit us up.
Yep. Reach out.
And that has been the two questions. Thanks, gentlemen, for that. Okay, great. Let's talk about the film Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, and also, what if we managed to talk about it without mentioning the context at all? What if we were going pure death of the author or
shot
whatever?
And released this film. That was it. We watched the film.
I mean, look, he did shoot the film and it was released. That part is undeniable. Actually, you know what? Real quick, Chad, what's your Schrader relationship, personal history to this film, personal history to the man?
Yeah, I'm a huge Schrader person. I came to him. I've seen, I think, all of his features except for like 3 or 4. And I came to him like, I'd obviously seen the Scorsese collaborations, and then kind of got into him on his own a little after college and kind of was seeing, started with like American Gigolo and Cat People, and then was kind of like catching up with some of his work that was not very, when he was not very in vogue, like the Walker. And then really, I think The Canyons is when I really sort of turned on to him, in the sense, not that movie is necessarily my favorite, but the kind of all the stuff around the release of that movie, where it kind of brought him back, I think, in the mind of at least the cinephilia as like a major artist. And I remember it was on the cover of Film Comment, and, you know, had famously like been rejected from Sundance, and, you know, kind of, there was just kind of a lot of stuff around it. And I was like also a fan of Bret Easton Ellis at that time too. So like, that kind of then made me go back to, you know, finally kind of see Mishima and Blue Collar and Hardcore, and I really like Patty Hearst as well, and Affliction, and Light Sleeper, and yeah. So I've kind of gone through all of these, and then I also started, you know, that's when I started like I saw Dog Eat Dog in a theater, and then when I was so exciting when he sort of was in vogue again with First Reformed, which, you know, I saw at like a surprise late screening at the New York Film Festival, and just was completely shattered and blown away by it. And it's like basically my best of the decade. And and so it's just been awesome to kind of have him back and you know, kind of infusing. I just think he's such an interesting mind and filmmaker, and even his movies that don't totally work are really fascinating, like Touch, which I just watched for the first time the other day. And, you know, I'm really excited for O Canada. I saw this movie similarly when I was going down that rabbit hole, and kind of could not believe that he had just directed an Exorcist movie. I remember at the time that all of this happened, I was definitely paying attention to, you know, movie culture, and knew that a version had been, you know, shelved, and then a new version had come out, but I didn't see either of them at the time. And I, again, kind of vaguely knew who Paul Schrader was, but wasn't really paying that much attention. And also at that time, like, I hadn't seen any Exorcist sequels. I had only seen the first one. And when I kind of slowly went through them all, and when people started talking about kind of Exorcist 3 being really good, which it is. Yep. So I went through all of them, and even 2, which I think is much maligned, I think is pretty interesting. And like, my joke up until very recently was that there was no bad Exorcist movies, not counting the beginning. And then unfortunately that statement can no longer be said truthfully after last year.
I did not watch that film.
Oh, me neither. It looks awful.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it was. Either.
I mean, it's a film that had people saying, "Thank God William Friedkin is dead."
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So
truly hurts. We're talking about 2023's Exorcist: The Believer. By
Exorcist,
the way,
Make Me a Believer.
Unclear. Yes. Yeah.
Do we know if the Imagine Dragons song plays in that?
Can't say for sure.
I saw the trailer for that. I think it was released with Oppenheimer. I have a vague sense
that sounds right. It's just like, what if The Exorcist, but there were 2 girls instead of 1?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it had Ann Dowd in it, which is a good move. And also,
but like, God bless Ann Dowd. You can get Ann Dowd. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like, she works.
If we could get Ann Dowd.
She works.
Yeah. She does. And they managed finally to get Ellen Burstyn back for the first time, basically by promising to like fund a scholarship for young actors that she wanted to set up, which is pretty cool.
That's
Ellen
nice.
Burstyn.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure making sure all her scenes were sitting down in a chair in one kitchen.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes the chair was higher to make it look like she was standing. But the trailer plays on the Limax screen over in Burbank, and it gets a fucking round of applause.
Really?
In the theater.
Maybe people just love The Exorcist, and maybe they like David Gordon Green.
They were excited, I think, like, wow, a new Exorcist. But I'm like, with like a Hamilton guy? Come on. That's fake, you know? No Hamilton guys in movies. That's my... with the exception of Matrix Resurrections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Knock at the Cabin. The ones that have that guy are, I guess, okay. And if I've seen a movie that had a Hamilton guy in it, but I didn't know that it was a Hamilton guy, and I liked it,
then that's okay. Yeah,
that's okay as well.
Well, we'll see if, you know. I mean, I'm not like a Flanagan head, but I do like most of the stuff of his that I've seen. So maybe he can turn this around.
Flanagan did Dr. Sleep, right?
Yeah.
So maybe his Exorcist reboot or whatever will also basically be an X-Men movie as well.
Sure. Yep.
That movie goes fairly X-Men, in my opinion. Anyway, I've been to a doctor's sleep. Her name was Susie X. Fong, and she made me wear a thing while I was sleeping. And she said, you have sleep apnea on your back, but if you sleep on your side, you're fine. So
very cool.
There you go.
If only it had been that easy for the old crew over there at the hotel.
Yeah, exactly. Just turn over. Just get a pregnancy pillow like I did.
Yeah.
All right, so we got to get into this. Okay, so here's some production context.
I want to give you I'm rolling out the red carpet for you, Jake. Sometimes the production context, we have to mix it with the story to make sure everybody's on board. I don't know that we've ever had a film that demanded more explanation of how it was made, what happened.
And the Shining style, an elevator door is opening in slow motion and a red carpet is tumbling in.
Beautiful.
And knocking the chair. No, you know what knocks the chair? That's my favorite part of that sequence, when the chair gets pushed by all the blood. Okay, so Exorcist 3 does better than expected. It comes out in 1990.
Critically, commercially.
Directed by William Peter Blatty. Well, I think it's critically, I think people are kind of cold on it when it comes out, but it does make money. It makes a small
I was
amount of
also
money.
Comparing it to Exorcist 2, which, although I agree with our guest here that I actually think it's an interesting film. I think maybe Schrader called it ambitious. Yeah, Jake, you and I watched it together, I believe, back in the day.
Scorsese praises it as well, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. But I think when I say that it did surprisingly well after that absolute bomb.
It was it was derided and a bomb for sure.
Yeah, it's on lists of worst films ever made that are put together by boring people.
Right.
But it's a whiff. So Exorcist 3 does decently. And after around that time, that's the early 90s, James G. Robinson, who I think is Morgan Creek Entertainment.
Yes.
Like, basically it was him. Like, he was the guy. He made his money in like car parts or something and then started a production company. He hires William Wisher Jr., who is a friend of the aforementioned Jim Cameron and had worked on Terminator and Terminator 2. He I think plays guys who get killed by Terminators in those movies as well. So he puts together a treatment. Then in 1999, Morgan Creek hires, this part I am having trouble believing. It says that they hire Tom McLaughlin, who is the director of Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6, and something called One Dark Night, and Stephen King's Sometimes They Come Back. So they hired this guy on. So you've had William Friedkin, John Borman, William Peter Blatty, who was the guy who wrote the novel, and now this guy who hasn't directed a movie since in 99 when they hired him, he hasn't directed a movie since 1987's Date with an Angel, starring Emmanuel Bayard and Phoebe Cates. Like, what's going on?
I'm going to reveal at least Schrader's thesis about James G. Robinson, which is that he was a guy who didn't exactly know what he wanted out of this film. So I think this, it makes sense that maybe initially they're doing one thing and then they decide
I feel
to
like if you
return
don't know
to
what you
auteur
want,
zone.
if you don't know what you want, you get at least somebody like Renny Harlin who's made like movies before.
Yeah, maybe,
you know?
maybe, yeah.
I don't know. And then McLaughlin departs due to issues with the script, supposedly. And then somehow Caleb Carr, who's this guy who's a bizarre guy, he's like the son of a beat figure.
Not just, I read that he was the son of a guy named Lucien Carr, and I said, wow, that's like the extraordinarily famous member of the Beat Generation. Yeah. That's funny. And he is actually Lucien Carr's son. Yeah.
Yes,
wow.
He's Lucien Carr's son. Yeah. And then he like the children of sort of counterculture figures, grows up to be like a foreign policy guy, basically.
Writes about terrorism and like why Clinton shouldn't do humanitarian interventions. He should only do semi-military interventions.
But he also got on the bad side of Kissinger, which I guess is like, that's maybe kind of not that hard to do.
Yeah, he critiqued the CIA too. Kind of a strange mix, but ultimately still a military foreign policy guy.
Yeah, he's a freak. And he also writes the novel The Alienist, which was made into a prestige TV series with Dakota Fanning a couple of years ago. So he writes a new screenplay, which is apparently strong enough to attract the attention of John Frankenheimer.
Incredible.
Now, this is a name, I think, in line with Friedkin and Borman. It's like, okay, this seems like a guy, the kind of guy
specifically 70s guy also.
Yes,
or
exactly.
even earlier in some cases.
And I would like to see John Frankenheimer's Sleepaway Camp. Just, I don't know, pulling that one out of
Sure.
my ass. And it also attracts the attention of Liam Neeson for the lead role of Father Lancaster Merrin. Speaking of which... Did you hear that?
Nope.
Yes, I did.
I played the WTF theme song. Okay. And so Blatty's not involved, but I think he had been fighting with Friedkin since the 70s, or everyone was mad about not getting enough money from the at one point highest grossing film of all time or whatever. So makes sense. Then Frankenheimer he has a stroke. Yeah. Actually, first he's having back problems. So he has a spinal surgery. He has to step down from the film. As a complication of the spinal surgery, he has a stroke and then he dies. And so James G. Robinson decides to replace him with Paul Schrader, at which point he should have known what kind of movie he was going to get, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, this is just as Schrader will go on to say, they got buyer's remorse. He's pretty clear-eyed about how it all goes, which
Yeah, I actually think surprisingly mature in the way he talks about it. Doesn't seem like he's critical in the sense of saying this is a bad guy, just a guy who changed his mind. I think he's also compares it to saying he bought a Lexus and then decided he should have bought a Hummer and then went to go buy the Hummer instead.
But also, they have, prior to these interviews, they have all signed non-disparagement agreements. So,
okay.
That might not be the full extent of his feelings.
I like Paul describing himself as a Lexus.
That's a great point that also basically just occurred.
But he doesn't say Toyota,
It is a pretty bizarre... I mean, it is in line with kind of an auteur making, one of these movies, as the other three were as well. But he hasn't really done anything approaching a horror movie, nor would he when he made this movie. But
he made cat people.
That's a good point. Very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So he makes cat people in the 80s while talking about how
I forgot.
But while talking about how he doesn't care about horror movies and he doesn't think they're a legitimate genre, and that movie doesn't do that great. So
he straight up says, "I don't care about this."
Yes.
Yeah, it's fun.
But he turns it into kind of more of an erotic fantasy kind of whatever. Yes.
But
it's I mean, have you seen Forever Mine? I mean, that
yes.
If that's the, autofocus, I think is good, but Forever Mine is, if that's him kind of, going into thriller territory, it's that's not among his best work.
No, it's not.
No, although I would be interested to know what Ray Liotta would do with the part of Father Lancaster Merrin. That would be interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, I think Gretchen Mol could do a lot with a bunch of possession makeup on her face.
So sure.
She's a talented actress. Joseph Fiennes not invited to this version of the film. So then Gabriel Mann comes on. We all know him as Alan M. from Josie and the Pussycats. That's immediately clocked. Oh, yes. And they're getting ready to shoot the movie. It's officially titled, I mean, it's got 1 million titles, but at this point, I think it is going to be called Exorcist the Beginning. Stellan Skarsgård comes on. He had worked with, or he was friends with Schrader. They were familiar with one another. And I think it's funny because in the novel, Merrin is Irish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Max von Sydow, I looked it up, it's Sydow. Max von Sydow was doing kind of an Irish accent in some scenes. And then they hire another Swede
to play Danish,
to play Dutch.
Oh, you're right. Excuse me.
Play Dutch. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And he does not adjust his
right, which I think is fine. I mean, I think I do
totally
think that piece of casting is pretty great and makes a lot of sense. He is kind of the heir to Max von Sydow in some ways. I feel like from
he's the new Swede.
It's
he's a burlier Seventh Seal era Max von Sydow. It makes sense to me. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, Seventh Walrus, burlier than a seal.
Yeah,
not that I think Stellan Skarsgård is a very handsome man. Yes. Anyway, but also I think walrus-shaped men can be handsome too, and I'm backing slowly away from the microphone. Mm-hmm. So Stellan, just real quick, Stellan is he's in all these franchises now. I mean, he's while still being a respected actor, I think he's in Pirates. He's in Star Wars now. I think he plays Andor's dad or whatever.
Marvel.
He's in the Marvel movies. He's all over the place. He's securing the bag, and also his son.
He's in Dune as well.
He's Dune.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, he's. Yeah, I think he. You know,
I like
money
Sam
too,
Jackson.
man. Like, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hey.
Yep.
God, imagine if they came out with a Money 2. Guess that's crypto. Okay, so they also Billy Crawford, one of the weirdest decisions in the whole
this is pretty
series of
fascinating.
some of the weirdest decisions there are. Billy Crawford apparently was like James G. Robinson's idea. Robinson brought on Skarsgård. According to Schrader, which like he's also in a position to basically say anything that wasn't received perfectly was somebody else's idea. But he brings on this guy, Billy Crawford, who's a Filipino actor and singer, to play Kenyon.
Correct. To play a character that is also ultimately discarded in the second version of this film entirely.
Yeah,
Yes,
which we have to
completely
get
cut
to.
out.
Yeah.
So, and then Vittorio Storaro is attached to
This
as
is
the
very
cinematographer,
strange to me also.
a big old heavy hitter.
Mhm.
So they start shooting it in Morocco in 2002. 6 weeks in Morocco, 2 months in Rome at Cinecittà doing interiors and stuff.
Mhm.
But they go to Morocco, which like that's where Scorsese shot Last Temptation, which I think is notable. And also where he shot Kundun, because hard to get to Tibet. So, you know, this is like a on location, like a pretty serious attempt at making a real movie. Schrader shows a cut of the I mean, he'll talk about how like from dailies they were already having cold feet, but like he's shooting a Paul Schrader version of the movie essentially. He says he does a small rewrite, but mostly it's the script that Carr had written that Robinson liked. He shoots the movie. He shows an early cut of the film that's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. And the studio's like, it's not scary. There's no gore. What are you doing? They want to re-edit the movie. He says, you can't re-edit it because that stuff isn't there. This is a script problem, not an edit problem. Let me do
he points
reshoots.
out that the main stuff that he rewrote from Carr's draft was actually taking away more conversation scenes between the priest and the devil.
Carr gives an interview that is so nasty and combative that he gets fired by Morgan Creek essentially to preserve their part of the non-disparagement agreement. Like he is
legal protection.
He has begun disparaging Schrader so much that he can no longer be a party to the lawsuit. So like, but Schrader takes plenty of shots at this guy and says like he wrote like 10 minutes of.
Well, I mean, I don't know that he also signed a non-disparagement clause, as we've pointed out, but he basically says that the reason he signed on is one, out of respect for Frankenheimer, and two, because he liked the script, and the only horror movie he's ever cared about, supposedly, is the original Exorcist.
Yeah, he says it's like the greatest metaphor in cinema. It's a priest and the devil arguing over the fate of a little girl.
Yeah. I don't know what he was saying in private, but it's funny that Carr gets so mad at him when he seemed to be saying like, this felt like a new area that was worth me doing this. Your
it's
script.
Also like, I mean, Chad, I don't know if you would agree with this, but like if you told me that Paul Schrader wrote this script from the ground up, I would believe you. Like this really feels like it has
100%. I think it's you know, and I don't know if I ultimately maybe like this movie more than you guys do, but I do think it's very interesting. It has a lot of his themes in it.
I think so too.
It even has it's a little bit of a First Reformed precursor in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I'm curious as to your guys' thoughts about its kind of portrayal and equivocation of imperialism and, you know, missionary work with the satanic rot of people's souls. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, all that stuff's in here. And I think that stuff is very good and very interesting. I think the movie looks gorgeous and Stellan's great in it. I think the things that it lacks are things that Schrader is not really interested in, which is like A, scares, and B, kind of, I don't know how to put, like, the design element. There's design elements of the movie that really do not work, I think, particularly like the creatures or the, you know, when they're
the hyenas.
That, I mean, I think that's a matter of them just not giving him any money in post-production.
Right.
But
I think so too.
Because the hyenas looked okay in the Exorcist, the beginning.
Yep.
They do. Yeah. We'll get to our thoughts on the film, but I would say that I like the further the film gets from being an Exorcist film, the more I like it. Like, I like the stuff that is the least Exorcist-y.
Right.
But one of the things that I think makes The Exorcist such a high art film is like that opening where like, what the fuck were we doing in Iraq? And like this connection to not only kind of imperial plunder and the ancient evils, but also the modern evil of colonialism, but also like just this kind of this sense of the strange and the especially Father Marin's like there's a guy with a whole other set of shit happening that is like peripheral to the story until he shows up, which I think is great.
I know we probably can't talk about the original Exorcist much here because we simply don't have the time, but I did rewatch
I get
it.
Too scared.
Yeah, of course. In anticipation of this. And I mean, it's a kind of boring opinion that, you know, is not worth sharing, but it's incredibly good. And part of that is the same reason
it is.
People talk about Jaws being good, which is that most of the first half of the film is scary only in the sense of what would you do if you were a single mom who's working and your daughter was very sick? Like something was wrong with your daughter.
Yeah.
What would you do if your mom had to be put in a nursing home and you are a poor priest? That is truly the first 2/3 of the film. That's it. That's what's going on. Right. And the actual scary Exorcist stuff doesn't come into the last quarter, the last half hour, maybe.
What if one room of your house got really cold?
Right. Yeah.
But we'll get to all that. We gotta sort of hurry up the production context here. So anyway, as Schrader says, they got buyer's remorse. He is given options to re-edit the film, and again, sort of repeats like, there's nothing in here that you'll find that will give you the movie you want. They bring in Sheldon Kahn to re-edit the film, who had apparently worked with Schrader on the edit in Rome, I think. But then they bring him in separately, Sheldon Kahn, who, like, you know, he edited One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Mikey and Nicky, and if you're going to bring somebody in to edit a movie without the director, it's probably the guy to get. But Schrader's pissed, obviously.
Yep.
And but he also says that Morgan Creek is famous for doing this, basically. Like, they leave you alone during the shoot and then they fuck you over in the post-production. That's what he says. Yeah. After the non-disparagement agreement. And then, so he's basically, he either is fired or walks away, and depending on who you ask. Then they are looking for other directors to figure out how to fix the movie. And Renny Harlin, who is, at this point, like post-Cutthroat Island. Like, he's now known as one of the fiasco guys.
Yeah.
But also, you know, director of Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and Long Kiss Goodnight and The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, but Die Hard 2 as well, which made a lot of money. Deep Blue Sea, which is a extremely fun film that has Stellan Skarsgård in it.
Trash to piece. You forget Cliffhanger, which I would say is his only legitimately good movie.
I haven't seen Cliffhanger.
It's kind of amazing. I mean, I think also, Long Kiss Goodnight is pretty good too, but Cliffhanger is great. Well,
have you seen any of the stuff he made since moving to China?
No.
Maybe that stuff's good. One of them has
it's possible.
Pierce Brosnan. Oh wait,
I'm seeing something called Reunion 3 Singles Cruise,
which is that's a Finnish comedy.
I mean, he's a Finnish guy. Yeah.
These guys, I mean, at this point, how are they still reuniting? They're just together, you know, after the first reunion, like they're back. Friends who are back, 2 or 3, whatever. So his suggestion is, well, you got to just reshoot it from the ground up.
Yeah.
And then they're like, you're hired. So he replaces most of the cast.
Except, well,
it's like half.
Yeah. That's the weirdest part. It's Stellan Skarsgård.
The principals, I would say. It's Stellan Skarsgård is back, but he replaces Alan M. from Josie and the Pussycats with James Darcy.
He replaces the assistant priest. We haven't explained what the
actual role is. The woman, of course.
The doctor. The woman, exactly.
Yes.
But Major Granville is back.
Yes, Major Granville is back.
The interpreter is back.
Yeah,
yes,
Chuma
the African
is back.
casts are largely the same.
which really makes it feel like you're watching like a second run Broadway show, like 10 years after the original, and you're sort of like,
with like more famous people, but like, are they better? You know,
exactly. Yep.
So, and he also like 3 days into shooting in Rome, Renny Harlin gets hit by a car that shatters his leg. So,
whoa, I didn't know this part.
Wow.
and he's like apparently very serious about the curse. He's like, it's not funny to me. I don't want to. It's it's very serious. This is my Finnish accent. So yeah, he brings on this guy Alexi Hawley to rewrite the script, and they bring in a special effects guy, and Storaro stays on.
Yeah.
Despite if you've seen what is released as Exorcist at the beginning, it doesn't look
Chronicles of Riddick.
Yes.
Hey, you take that back. It looks like the skeleton key.
Yeah, it's all close-ups. It's it's just so much slicker in a bad way.
It looks like I was gonna say it looks like 5 or 10 years newer and worse.
I mean,
right.
it's
like
green
a Platinum
screen stuff.
Dunes movie, basically.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The green screen thing at the end where he's doing the Father Marin walk into St. Peter's Basilica, but you can tell his feet aren't touching the ground. Incredible.
There's some really awful CG in both movies.
Correct.
In Exorcist the beginning, there's also that like crane down
Egypt
into
pan.
the city, and it literally looks animated by hand. Like it looks like something out of the Prince of Egypt, and then goes into a real set.
I think what's interesting about this film in concept, well, just to finish up, they released Exorcist the beginning, which is now cost, including the budget of the first film, it's like maybe above $90 million, depending on who you ask.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it eats shit and nobody likes it.
Yeah.
And so at this point, Schrader on opening weekend goes with William Peter Blatty to see it. Blatty invited him. And he said,
that must have been a fun day out. Yeah.
He said, this is really bad. If it stays this bad, I bet there's a chance I could get mine resurrected. So he's like,
smart.
He's
excited.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then Morgan Creek, I think they're like, well, we have this thing.
Yeah,
and if we
this is the
finish it really
strangest move of
cheaply,
all.
maybe we can get more money. Apparently, like, there's a teaser for it included on the DVD of Exorcist the Beginning, which is crazy.
The figure I read was that they gave Schrader $35,000 to finish it out.
And like 3 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's not like there were a bunch of Schrader heads out there then in the same way.
For it.
You know what I mean?
True.
Like,
but he does.
There wasn't like a Roxy Cinema full of, you know.
Right. But he does give an interview to CaptainHowdy.com. Got to shout out this extremely thorough CaptainHowdy.com interview. Exclusive, it says, from 2005, where the guy at one point asks him, do you have a religious background? Which I think is funny.
Wow. Great research, Captain.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think he then follows it up with a question that suggests that he knew that, but he was maybe asking it like for the reader or something. But you could just say, how did your religious background inform this? Whatever. I'm not going to tell Captain Howdy how to do his job. Schrader says, here's the bottom line. You have a company that's notorious for not letting directors have the final say. A deal breaker with Morgan Creek is always final cut. The films are re-edited and the directors are shunted off. It's a historical pattern. So what's the upshot of all this? Making a $35 million film and getting final cut for a company that doesn't give final cut, which goes into the marketplace without any financial obligations. Nobody expects it to make money, and it goes into the marketplace with the predisposition of critics and cinephiles to be kind to it because of this sad history. It's an ideal situation. So, like, Schrader...
Hey, good for him.
For a guy who's so prickly and so cantankerous, he's often very clear-eyed about like how the industry works and his position within it.
It's true.
And sometimes he'll just pull out this really like, look, man, I got to do something weird and who cares? And I'm doing fine.
He just cares ultimately that the movie is out there and exists, which is kind of remarkable. I mean, I do think that, like, you were asking me before if this is, I believe it is pretty unprecedented. I don't know. I can't think of another example where...
Well, since then, this is kind of a release the Schrader cut situation.
Sure, right. Yes, that's true, actually. It is an analog...
without anyone asking.
Right. It is an analog, I guess, with Justice League, although I have not and would never watch either one of those movies, so I don't know how much footage crosses over.
That's the question.
I know he shot a lot more.
Right. You mean Joss Whedon reshot a ton of it?
He did, but I think also Snyder shot a bunch. Most of it, I believe, like green screen.
Oh, reshot more once it was going to be re-released. I think that's true, yeah.
A fair amount of what he did also could just be digital models of Gal Gadot from 300 feet away or whatever.
And we wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then there's also Tony Gilroy reshot most of Rogue One. Or at least a lot of it, but then that's a little different because it's still it's more like somebody else taking over in reshoots, and it's not redoing from scratch a completed film. But it is such a perfect metaphor for a studio executive, is that they think that they fucked up and then they spend double the money to fuck up even worse, and then release the other one, which probably would have, if you just gave Dominion a real release in the same way that Exorcist the Beginning got, I promise you it would have made about the same amount of money and gotten about the same reviews, and you would have just not spent $40 million for no reason.
Yep.
Schrader says this. He repeats this theory in this interview, and he also talks about how by the time they had to release it, they had so many titles. It screened at the Belgium International Film Festival as Paul Schrader's Exorcist, the original prequel. And then Warner Brothers at some point got involved, and they were going to call it The Exorcist 4, just IV. And then there was also a title that was Exorcist: Dark Angel, which I would say is not a description of anything that happens in the film. Jessica Alba, not anywhere to be found.
Well, it's a completely bizarre thing to try to explain to a non-cinephile public. What do they think it is?
Do they think it's a sequel to Exorcist the Beginning or something?
Only people that would have been interested in it by that time were Paul Schrader heads, and of which there were... How much did this movie make in theaters? $400,000?
Something like that.
That's about as many as there were, I think, at that time.
Yeah. It made 250,000.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
in 110 theaters.
Probably about the same amount that Touch made. I would guess.
Right.
Yeah. I just the thing about hiring Schrader is you got exactly what you were
Schrader
paying
promises.
For.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think makes the situation fascinating. Is it's not a case of director went in and produced something totally distinct from what they expected, which is not, I'm not trying to defend studios in that scenario either, but at the very least, you can argue they have a vision, the director produces a different vision, and those things are in conflict. This was, as Schrader said, what was in the script, what you would expect from Schrader, and then they changed their minds. And then just to finish out his final edit process, like we said, had a very low budget. He and the editor that they bring in had to improvise the color timing because they can't
approximate it because Storaro was unavailable. Yeah,
right. And Storaro, by the way, who we've referenced several times, but is one of the most famous cinematographers of all time, from Apocalypse Now and Conformist, which we know Paul Schrader loves, and all these things. But they get Angelo Badalamenti.
Michael Mann in the 90s, right?
I don't know.
No, I don't think he ever worked with
I'm thinking
Mann.
of Spinati. I'm thinking of the other Italian guy.
It was Mann's guy at the time, yeah.
He did some latter day. He did the Justin Timberlake, Woody Allen film also.
He did Dick Tracy, right?
Yes.
One of the craziest
looking movies ever, yeah.
Yeah, so they do this cheapo soundtrack, and they also get a band that Schrader's son is a fan of to put this all together.
As he describes it, it's called Dog Fucker Disco or Dog Fashion Disco. Excuse me.
Dog Fashion Disco. Yeah.
Okay, so Schrader says, my son is a metalhead, and he's one of their devotees. Works on their website, follows them around. They were without a record label, so they made up a demo tape of some of their new material. I gave it to a friend of mine, Danny Goldberg, who has a label called Artemis. Danny signed them. They just came out with a live album. They were so happy. They said, anything we can ever do for you, we'll do it. Then a couple of months later, I said, remember when you offered to do anything for me?
Yep.
And so they, not only did they take Badalamenti's totally for free 14 minutes of score or whatever,
presumably
and try to
went to the studio for 3 hours, his home studio.
That's still really sweet of him. That was
so
a touching story to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
To help out his buddy. Yeah. And then they basically just kind of try to blend it all together. They use some of the Trevor Rabin score as well.
Yeah.
It's just so funny to see Paul Schrader say, "I got my friends from Dog Fashion Disco." Like,
Right.
oh, okay.
And then the other things that feel really unfinished are like the Helvetica credits, which I noticed.
Yeah.
Well, have you seen Dark? Have you seen his
no,
version?
I can't
of,
wait to though. I have not seen Dying of the Light or Dark.
Because this happens again,
or
basically.
Light of Day. So I only don't watch
Light of
related Paul Schrader
Right,
movies
there you go.
apparently.
There you
but
go.
I do need to see all of these for sure.
Yeah, because we'll get to it when we get to it. But Dying of the Light is a film with Nicolas Cage that Schrader does, and Nick Winding Refn is involved somehow. I think.
Yeah, I think he executive produced it or something.
Okay, and the studio starts meddling, and they like ban him from Facebook or whatever.
He got the edit taken away from him on that.
And
yeah.
Schrader eventually releases his own version of the film on BitTorrent.
Yes, which is very cool. But it is, I do believe, like, it's not necessarily his version of it because he doesn't. He didn't have access to the elements anymore, so he had to edit it from the final cut that was
like an
released from like an
MP4
MP4.
He Topher graced his own film.
So he basically just turned it into like an experimental film that was more interesting to him, which I think is very cool.
Right.
But it's not, he didn't get to like go back and like make his version of the movie like he did with this, where it's like, I think, yes, you know, the color timing, the music, little rough around the edges, definitely the VFX. Obviously, they didn't give him any money for it.
Yeah,
but I don't know. Other than that, it's pretty watchable, like as a movie. You know, it doesn't play as like a work print or whatever.
No. And it just like watching. Well, let's talk about Dominion first, and then we can kind of talk about what the
beginning.
Exorcist, the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
Ian, do you want to give us a plot sum?
Be happy to. I know we had a lot of necessary production talk, so I'm going to try to keep it short. And then if you guys have parts that you want to add in for later discussion, please do that. All right. Yep. So we have Stellan Skarsgård as, again, Father Merrin, who's in the original film. And now we are doing a flashback to Holland in 1944. The Nazis are there, and they put him in this impossible moral dilemma of saying that he has to either choose somebody from his flock to be sacrificed by the Nazis because they had one of their officers killed or something. So he has to accuse somebody knowing that they're going to be innocent. And he opts not to do that. And the Nazis end up killing 10 people and forcing him to pick 10 people because he didn't pick one. So as a result of trying to follow his sort of like virtue ethics, non-consequentialist morals initially, he ultimately is forced into this utilitarian position where he does go against everything he believes and starts to sacrifice multiple people. Anyway, so he's haunted.
Evil on Earth, basically.
Exactly. Yes. And he kind of has semi-left the church, lost faith, and now he's doing archaeological digs in Africa, specifically
he's doing Indiana Jones. He's doing Brendan Fraser, The Mummy.
Yep, in British colonial Kenya. And there's a weird situation where, because he's still kind of in trouble, and there's another priest who comes, Father Francis, the Gabriel Mann character, and is in good with the church and also in good with the local colonial authority. They sort of demand control or participation in his newest dig, which is the strange church, which seems Byzantine, but the Byzantines weren't there, et cetera, et cetera. So first, Father Francis goes, and he's kind of like a doe-eyed young priest who read the father's works in seminary, and he's going to set up a missionary school there. And when they discover more about the church, and also there's sort of like tensions with the local people, the indigenous Africans, he also suggests that they reach out to the army and bring them in as kind of protection of the archaeological site. So he talks to his friend Major Granville, and he sends this unit, or comes with a unit, I should say. The other thing that's going on is that there is a local boy who everybody believes is cursed. This is the Billy Crawford character, Cheche, and is sort of taken care of by Father Merrin, and also
to be clear, he's referred to as one of God's afflicted, which made me point at the screen like Leo. But also, he is got some physical deformities, and also very obvious makeup to make him look all fucked up, basically.
Yeah, in classic, I would say cinema history style, but also biblical history style, there's this question of, are these physical deformities representative of something that is wrong with him spiritually or something?
He looks like the guy from 300.
He does look a little bit like that. Or I thought he looked like a Buffy vampire.
He did, very much, yeah.
Yeah. So he's taken care of by both Father Merrin and the doctor, whose name I think is Rachel, who's there. And there's kind of some romantic tension between those two. So they discover this freaky church. Freaky church seems to be not a church for the gathering of people to praise God, but a seal against something dark underneath.
This is basically, by the way, the setup of the Tom Cruise Mummy movie. Except that is in Iraq, but they find like an underground temple, and they're like, all this stuff seems to be trying to like contain something. Let's touch all of it. Let's see what it's containing.
I'm going to spoil something. I want to discuss something very close to where I live that is basically a real life version of this, where the Catholic Church built a church over an indigenous church to seal in the devil.
Holy shit, that rules.
Yeah. Anyway, they go down. There's an indigenous African church underneath, or like an old temple that I think every Exorcist fan can sort of tell this is like a Pazuzu.
It's a familiar statue. Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, they're trying to heal this boy. They're giving him some treatments, and he seems to be getting better. Simultaneously, also the tensions between the colonial authority and the natives are rising, because there's some soldiers found dead after they try to steal from the temple, and then the African people get mad and attack back, blah, 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 right? It's sort of going the direction that you expect it to. And I think we are all going to talk about this imperial aspect. But basically, things get worse and worse, and then the discovery is that Cheche may not just be sick after all, that he may actually be possessed. The younger priest discovers this, Father Francis, and he tries to take action against it. And in the course of this, and the doctor and Father Merrin don't necessarily believe him, but in the course of this, he is both attacked by Pazuzu Cheche and then captured by the Africans and shot full of arrows like Saint Sebastian.
Yep. And very Schrader.
Yeah, extremely Schrader. So now Father Merrin's really been spurred into action, right? It's like he has to do something to stop all this and stop the conflict that's brewing outside and stop the evil that's in Cheche and save Rachel. And he goes to have a big end of Exorcist style confrontation. I think this is the most like the original film, and we even get a little bit of fan servicey stuff of him taking out his cassock and the things that we know from The Exorcist. So sort of like
get a couple Pazuzu faces, a couple Captain Howdy faces.
Yeah, his special little gear and the Pazuzu faces in the dark. Yeah. So he goes, confronts the devil, confronts his own guilt about the Nazi situation in the past, and also in the course of this has been, before Francis died, was talking to him about his crisis of faith and about whether Francis himself was guilty for bringing in the colonial authority and causing all this. And I think we'll get into those discussions as well. But in the end, he expels the demon. Cheche is fine. He's going to be an assistant. Father Merrin returns to the priesthood, not going to have his romance with Rachel, but he gets to walk off into the fog in a fancy finale.
Right, that's basically sort of the Searchers-esque, except that we know he's going to return. He's going to go into some houses later, because we've seen that movie.
It's true, yes. Any really big stuff that I missed, you guys?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess the central question that Pazuzu or the devil, it's a little unclear if it's, because I don't think anyone says Pazuzu.
Which is,
I think it's
also true in the original. I mean, there's a question of, because the person in Reagan's body calls himself the devil. Doesn't say he's a demon, calls himself the devil.
Classic.
Well, and then something, I don't think you mentioned this, but in the climax as well, that there's a period where like Rachel kind of becomes possessed as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which in the Renny Harlin version, it's entirely focused on the Rachel character, now played by Isabella Scorupco from whichever James Bond movie that is. Mm-hmm. She gets possessed because she is a sort of dirty blonde-haired lady who you can put makeup on to look like Reagan from The Exorcist, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's a pretty harrowing scene where when the local natives are starting to kind of feud with the British soldiers, they kind of blame the influence of Christianity, and one of them goes into the Christian school and massacres all the kids,
right?
Including one of these two children that are the children of a local Christian convert man who seems, is very friendly to the priests. And in The Exorcist at the beginning, it is his son sort of takes on a lot of Cheche's, narrative tasks. Right. Which I think is bad.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's weird because the Harlin version adds characters while condensing characters from the Schrader version into one another. Very strange.
I mean, it also takes away, if we're comparing, it also takes away one of the more interesting moral considerations, which I think I want to clarify now that I agree with you, Chad, that I think Dominion is the better and much more interesting film, to be clear.
By far. But nothing will make you appreciate it like watching the other one.
Correct. Yeah. And so it takes away Father Francis as this figure who is well-meaning but ignorant and maybe causing suffering, and replaces him with a priest who secretly knew what exactly was going on with the church. In the Harlan version, the church was built to over the origins of evil, maybe the fall of Lucifer, the original spot where he landed or something. Yeah,
instead of having this kind of unanswered question about what this thing is doing here, which I think is much more compelling, of course, and weird. Yeah. I mean, in the CaptainHowdy.com interview, which I can't recommend enough. So he says that the guy interviewing him says, your film was being labeled as Father Merrin and the Secret of the Lost Church, which I guess is an Indiana Jones joke.
Yeah.
Which, he says, I didn't get that sense watching it. In Harlan's film, Merrin seemed like more of a swashbuckler, more of a hard ass. And to which Schrader says, yeah. But I
mean, right.
Schrader
the film
himself
opens with a Indiana Jonesy interaction with Father Merrin.
It leans so much further into Indiana Jones, where he's sitting in a souk cafe wearing a white linen
and
outfit.
Gets a mission from somebody,
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of snarky and
right. And there's a girl in his class who's written "Love Me" on her eyelids or whatever.
It's funny that they complain about the lack of gore. I agree that the movie is not scary,
gory,
but it's pretty fucking I texted you the other night of just this movie goes incredibly hard. I mean, the baby covered in maggots, the operation scene.
Schrader talks about how he did have the advantage when he was first editing the movie, when he thought it was his movie. Schrader talks about how he was trying to sort of speed up the editing. He was trying to give them closer to what he wanted. And once he saw the Harlan version, he said it actually gave him the freedom to pace his more deliberately and sort of, in opposition to that film, go for more of the 40s style, what he describes as more of a 40s style pacing that he was intending originally because it's set in the 40s or whatever. But he did also have access to Harlan's film, so he used the Trevor Rabin score, some of it, and then the interviewer says, were any sequences modified as a result of seeing Harlan's film? And Schrader said, well, I added one shot. There's a shot from Harlan's film in mine. Myers says, really? Which one? Schrader says, maggot baby.
Wow. Interesting. I did notice that I was pretty sure that was the only thing that repeated in both versions, but I didn't.
Yeah, pretty much.
I didn't know that was Harlan's that he took. That's interesting. That is a really horrifying image, and you know, in both versions do this, but I do think Paul's is edited better. But that's really when everything is escalating and going wrong, and it's intercut kind of in three, with three different sort of corners of the film, and that are all kind of escalating at once. And I found that to be pretty powerful. And really, to me, I just the opening of Schrader's version, I think, is so great. Kind of almost harkening back to the original Exorcist, where instead of, we're starting in the desert for a movie that takes place in Georgetown, a movie that takes place in the desert, we're starting in winter in Germany, and this beautiful snowfall that is kind of going everying and probably, and just
it's blowing upward a lot.
Really, which maybe he got that trick from in Bringing Out the Dead. They shot backwards, so the snow would go up. I don't think they're doing that here, but it's just I think a really awful and gut-wrenching and terrifying scene. And then in true studio note hack director fashion, instead of just opening with that scene and trusting that the audience will hold it with them throughout the film, the Renny Harlin version has to tease it out in flashbacks and not reveal it until the end, which is such a studio note. Like, that is exactly what they would tell you to do.
And I think nasty to do specifically with Nazi violence. I mean, obviously it's unsavory in any context, but like to sort of hold that, they're violating the Hanukkah rule by aestheticizing,
for sure. And
crimes.
it reminded me similarly of in Abel Ferrara's Welcome to New York, when the American version of that was taken away from him. The rape that opens the film that it's all about is, in his version, it just plays out in real time through the beginning of the film. And when they recut it, they made it into flashbacks and made it part of a sort of her recounting it to the police, which has the unfortunate effect of making it subjective instead of objective as well, which is really fucked up for a thing that really happened to somebody. This is a little different, but it reminded me of a similar boring and bad instinct to make something more palatable.
It's cool that people are still getting that instinct, though. Like, there are new studio executives who are coming up with the same bad ideas. It's something, it's sort of, it's like the original evil that's been around forever and still rearing its ugly head.
Yeah, it's a pretty timeless thing, because I think it depends on studio heads assuming that everybody watching the film is paying as little attention to the film as they are, right? Like, I was on my phone. I forgot that there was that part about Nazis. Could you just put it right before his moral crisis so that everybody remembers?
Right.
Yeah, I want to, since we're on the topic, I want to discuss this. I think the way it plays out is fascinating, because first it's presented as a impossible situation, but like I said, it's sort of a totally classic philosophical debate. Is your decision making based on the perceived benefit? Exactly. Perceived benefit of people around you, or is it based on what you believe to be like virtues or rules that would allow people to live the best way in the world, right? Like, I would never choose to kill somebody, or I would choose to kill somebody to save 30 people. But then later, this is the part that I want to pick your guys' brains about. That later, Marin is offered the opportunity to return to this time and like replay it by Pazuzu, or the devil. Was that a sound effect?
Yeah, I just played the...
He's doing it, and I keep trying not to laugh.
Keep playing the WTF theme.
Okay.
It's fun because me and Chad have like a little thing.
Is the joke that your thing is possessed by...
No, it's just you keep saying Father Marin, and which really, it should be because
I took too long to get that.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, Father Marin, if we saw the TV show, was Judd Hirsch, so really it has nothing to do with anyway.
Yeah. So there's this moment where
there's that moment.
They return, and what I think is fascinating about this is that he doesn't solve it. He plays it out according now this time to like purely what are called non-consequentialist ethics, of saying like, I'm just going to do the thing that I believe is right regardless of the effect it has. And now instead of 10 people being killed, he and the entire village are slaughtered. But what the devil tries to like offer him basically is, now don't you feel better because you weren't a participant? Like, you can say you're guiltless. So I think it invokes this sense of like how much of our personal morality or our regrets are based on kind of like selfish guilt, or like the effect it has on us going forward, not on the actual benefits.
What's fascinating about the central question in sort of his philosophical battle with the devil, or Pazuzu, or as I was calling him, Mewtwo, because the Cheche really starts to look like Mewtwo, and he like floats around. And then I found out
he does.
You know what's crazy is that Billy Caldwell, what's his name?
Billy Crawford did the song.
Billy Crawford, he did the movie, the Pokemon, the first movie version of the theme song. They hired him to sing it. And this guy's just got Mewtwo all over him.
Wow.
Anyway. I mean, the comparisons to Harrison Ford, to Indiana Jones, or Han Solo, or whatever, like it's a familiar kind of commitment arc that or recommitment arc that Marin is going through. But what the devil offers him is basically freedom from caring. it's like, and it reminded me
Precisely.
of The Last Temptation of Christ, where like it's painful. Faith is the more painful option. Faith, believing is, it's Schrader is acknowledging that like belief hurts more than not giving a shit, and the devil is tempting him with like, hey, you could just stop feeling guilty, and Marin opts to hold on to the pain, which is extremely the kind of thing I was hoping a Paul Schrader Exorcist movie would come to. And so I was, for all of the...
This movie is good, guys.
This movie is not bad, yeah. I mean, as my girlfriend put it, for all of the Star Wars Special Edition hyenas...
Yeah, but just forget it. They didn't give him any money to do it. Like, what are you going to do?
Give him any money. Yeah, no, it's
also 2004.
Ideas.
Like,
Yeah, and it produces the crazy image of a CGI bull chewing pieces of a CGI hyena. Very cheap CGI in both cases, and it's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, it's undeniable.
I mean, it looks like it's not quite like Spawn era. So rudimentary CGI that it becomes like,
or like Witch
art.
Hunt era. Yeah,
I think the first shot of the hyenas kind of is. I mean, that's the other thing. That's the other thing. The Renny Harlin does. He
gives
a lot more focus and less focus to different characters. He loves the hyenas. They're huge. They become like the second
and he has
lead
more
of this
locusts
movie
and stuff. He has like flies. Yeah, they are the
yeah.
It's like Sex in the City. It's Carrie, Miranda, Charlotte, Samantha, hyenas.
Right.
Yeah. And it's weird. What's weird is apparently they did have Whoopi Goldberg and Cheech Marin in mocap suits on set because of whoever the third guy was.
I wanted to ask you too, to talk a little bit about like the portrayal of the English imperialism but also its relationship in while they're propping up one another of Christian missionary work, which I think has, at least on its surface, somewhat of a more moral goal, hopefully, but still kind of is involved with quote unquote civilizing these people. And a thing this movie does that is pretty hardcore, I think, is like directly equates British imperialism with the Nazis. Those scenes are repeated, which is kind of amazing.
Yes, the difference being, so in the film we get kind of like a return to the who's responsible for this. We're going to shoot whoever's responsible, or else we're going to shoot everybody kind of return. So we get the Nazis doing that in Holland in the beginning, and then General Granville doing that here in what is now Kenya. The difference being then that he feels guilt and shoots himself in the head. So the British, we are told, they were capable of such barbarities as the Nazis, but then they felt bad, and all those British guys are now dead, is sort of the implication.
It's kind of like the Democrats,
Exactly. Yes. Just like it. Yeah. Been seeing a lot of those guys on the news lately. But just as a brief point of comparison, and Ian and I are not experts on East African history generally, British colonial history. We don't really know a whole lot.
No, pretty stupid.
Which is why we talk about ourselves on the show. I mean, I'm an expert. So, but Kenya specifically is like the site of a lot of anti-colonial and anti-imperial organizing for decades at this point. And there's a group called the Kikuyu Central Association, which was formed in the 1920s, that is focused on unifying one particular tribal group to sort of organize against colonial rule, and things like the British were literally taking the good land, giving it to white settlers, and then sending native Kenyans to hey, you guys can live in that swamp that nobody lived by before, because if you live there, you'll die. Yeah.
Can I quote our friend W.E.B. Du Bois on this, who was writing about it in 1925? Yeah, the colonial Kenya, this version of it, we should say, I think existed from 1920 to 1963, which I think is important to remember. Your parents may well have been alive when this was a British colony and this was happening. This is not ancient history by any means.
Yeah.
I believe he said, here was a land largely untainted by the fevers of the tropics, and here England proposed to send her sick and impoverished soldiers of the war. Following the lead of South Africa, Britain took or usurped 5 million acres of the best lands from the 3 million native inhabitants, herded them towards the swamps, giving them nothing as compensation, even there no sure title. Then by taxation, the British forced 60% of the black adults into slavery for the 10,000 white owners for the lowest wage. So that's what we're looking at here.
Jesus fucking
Yeah, they're
Christ.
getting Ian Ryan style diseases down there in the in the swamps.
Exactly.
And so then the government, so the KCA, the Kikuyu Central Association, is gaining power, and then the government, that's the British colonial government, banned the KCA during World War II, when leader Jesse Kariuki compared the compulsory relocation of Kikuyus who lived near white-owned land to Nazi policies on compulsory relocation of people. So this was not lost on Kenyans. And there was also something called a Kipande, which was a source of great objection by native Kenyans, which was basically like an identifying set of identifying papers that had to be worn at all times, signifying that you are a native Kenyan and not a British subject with full rights. Not
an actual person. Yeah, I read a little bit of an excellent book that I would recommend to our readers, although I didn't get to make it very far, but it's called Imperial Reckoning, The Untold Story of Britain's Gulag. So there's another point of comparison for you. And they basically describe them as like improvised work villages where the women and children were dying of disease and hunger because of the poor resources, and the men were just being worked to death.
Yeah. And also, we've also talked about the Mau Mau uprising a little bit, because in Taxi Driver
comes up Wizard.
Yeah, Travis Bickle, or no, is it Wizard or Bickle?
I think it's Wizard. Yeah,
Wizard refers to Harlem and black neighborhoods as Mau Mau land.
Mm-hmm.
The Mau Mau uprising happens like 5 years after this movie is set. It starts in 1952 and is a series of violent resistance. It starts as violent resistance to British colonial rule, and then is very quickly used as like a propaganda tool. It's some white people are killed, and then in response to this, but hidden from the world's eyes until later, something like 150,000 Kenyans were basically put into like concentration camps, not like concentration camps, and tortured. And
when you say hiding, the British took their records and threw them into the sea to prevent people from finding them. And then made fake records. They replaced them with fake records. And I'm not going to get into the details, but there have been revelations since then of systematic sexual abuse of detained Kenyans that are remarkably similar to things that are happening right now. So all that is still an ongoing concern for listeners who are wondering if this is over and done with. It's not. Yeah, I think this is very relevant because I mentioned that I like the Father Francis character, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at, Chad, is this crossover between these two groups, and the culpability that whether they share it completely, whether they have distinct situations. I think the fact that he has good intentions, right? He wants to start a school and wants to build a standing school later. And then his other intentions are just to protect the temple from raids. And I think to have this character who on paper, basically his only sin is ignorance of like how the British colonial authority operates. But this is the same sin that leads to, or that allows people to facilitate genocide and is allowing people right now, like you're saying, Jake. So I think it's fascinating that Schrader picks it as like, look, I'm not even saying this guy's a piece of shit. Stellan Skarsgård in the film is sort of like, look, you didn't know what would happen, but maybe for me, the takeaway is this is why it's our responsibility to educate ourselves and educate other people, because ignorance doesn't mean you're innocent. It just means you're only guilty of ignorance, and that can lead to truly awful things.
Right, but isn't there something inherently, I mean, like we did that with Native Americans too, like used education and Christianity as a means to sort of civilize, forcibly assimilate, civilize in quotes, and while simultaneously sort of genociding the people that wouldn't, right? And like
it's destroying identity so that you're erasing people and erasing culture on different fronts, and you can kind of point to one as, look how kind we're being by bringing the word of God to these people who otherwise would have gone to hell, like the hundreds of thousands of their relatives.
With legitimate, I'm sure he also was teaching math and Shakespeare or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's with a healthy dose of Christian propaganda as well. But I don't know. It's very interesting how they're both sides are kind of portrayed and their interweaving of one another, where Stellan's Father Marin is more I'm
not gonna play it for you.
Is more weary of and kind of world weary and sort of aware and knowing of kind of what this is bringing, but is too sort of broken spiritually to care. I mean, it is interesting. I've seen the movie twice now. It's like, is it really explained much, like how he goes from priest to archaeologist? Like,
no, I mean, I think,
like, what's he doing there?
I think he becomes kind of a lost. They mentioned he's a displaced person. I think he just becomes kind of a lost soul, and he finds, he just leaves Europe. I think is really like my reading of it was kind of he found a way to get really far away from the circumstances he was in before. But ironically, of course, the church's obsession with these occult objects is very similar to the Nazis' obsession with occult objects, and also the German and Austrian Catholic churches were heavily involved in the rat lines that got Nazis out of Europe and into South America after the war. Anyway, so but yeah, my reading of it is that he's running away from something, and what makes the Harlin film shitty in this section of it is that Skarsgård plays it as like a cool guy who is perfectly content with his swashbuckling role, whereas the Schrader film shows him, I think he plays it, he's very clearly unresolved, and he's a man who kind of doesn't know what his purpose is and doesn't feel like he's landed on, the rest of his life. Yeah.
He's often like walking around dead-eyed. He bumps into a sign because he just sort of, doesn't even know where he is, basically, spiritually or physically. Yeah, I mentioned earlier this situation near me in Oaxaca, but I think it's a very representative of what you're describing, Chad. So I want to highlight it here. So there's this place that is now referred to as Mitla, which is a ruin, and it is architecturally incredible, very well preserved. I think most of the structures there are 1,000 or up to 1,200 years old. And it was this example of syncretism because there's the Zapotec people who are here. They build most of it, but then also their kind of rivals, nearby enemies, the Mixtec people, they have these incredible designs that they are sort of put on top of it. So very interesting combination, whatever their relationship was at the time, just fascinating to consider. And the Spanish show up, and there's a famous sort of monk rivalry between two early Spanish priests who are in Mexico. One of them, Bartolomé de las Casas, is kind of the friend, pseudo-friend to the indigenous people, right? He was the guy who decried the burning of Mayan codices and said that the Spanish were making slaves.
He's the guy who recorded most of what we know about Columbus.
Exactly. Doing atrocities.
Atrocities, exactly.
Yeah. So one of the other monks with him, I believe they're called 12 Apostles of the New World or something. This guy whose historical nickname is Motolinia. And he also said, like, some of the stuff we're doing to the indigenous people is not great. However, we need to save their souls. So I think he's a bit of a Father Francis in the sense of like, I think these are humans too, but also our goal justifies any of the stuff that we bring along with us. And this absolute clown shows up in Oaxaca. First of all, the place that I'm describing, although it's now called Mitla, was originally called Leoba, which meant the place of rest. And that obviously the underworld for most of Mexican indigenous people was not like Christian hell at all. Of course, they're not fools. So this guy shows up, first of all, misunderstands entirely what this is, thinks that they're calling this place hell. And so he assigns it the Nahuatl word, which I don't know why he just decided to pick a word from a different indigenous people. So he calls it Mictlan, and the Spanish can't pronounce it, so they changed the name to Mitla. And they're so afraid of this place because some of the Zapotec people describe the Lord and Lady of the underworld as living in one of these temples underground. So they build this enormous church, the Church of San Pablo, on top of it, truly because they were afraid that the devil would come out and attack the Spanish army or turn the indigenous people against them. So they construct this enormous thing on top of a church, which was like a cool place, I think, historically. And just in case, I think in terms of reflecting Father Marin's sort of more objectivity about the people, there's a moment in the film where he says, like, you might think these are savages, but first of all, you ever heard of the Spanish Inquisition? Second of all, they're just doing things that are like part of their historical culture. Not far from this structure, Mitla, is a cave where the earliest evidence that I'm aware of the domestication of corn exists. It's 10,000 years old. So these are people who...
Damn, shout out.
Yeah, huge shout out. They have a culture. You ever eaten something with corn in it? You got to give it up to these guys. These were the guys who were doing it.
I'm like that little guy from the fair. Remember that kid?
No.
Yeah, the corn kid.
Did you miss
What are
this?
you guys talking about?
There was a kid who went viral.
Oh,
for
I
talking
know who you're
so
talking
Just a
about.
cute little boy who loves
So
corn.
cute little boy. He loves
The
corn
little
and he has
song.
a
There's a
speech
song,
impediment.
right? Yeah.
It's cone. He calls it cone. And I
You're
can do that
right.
because I had a speech impediment when I was a little boy.
It's respectful.
Anyway, shout out to the corn kid. I hope he is well. I hope 1,000 miracles upon him.
55 now, right? Yeah. So I just want to say that I think the film does capture some of this, like, not all priests in some ways of, like, there are some people who are more aware of what was bad about this. And also these people, even if they don't read as educated or civilized or something, they're just doing their own different culture that you don't know about.
It's what's so weird and frustrating, and again weird about how there is still an institution that takes like spiritual eternal ownership over what are just archaeological sites that should belong to the people of the world. But they're like, no, that's our building because we have continuity going back 2,000 years.
400 years. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, man. I mean, he also mentions, the British Museum. Or is
I
that
was just
just
going to say, shout out to the British Museum.
Reverse shout out to the British Museum.
I think specifically, he's saying, like, this is when Father Francis is suggesting the British Army come in to prevent looting. And I think he literally says something like, have you heard of the British Museum? That's where all that stuff came from.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, who says that?
Father Marin.
Oh, wait, that's the wrong. Fuck, that was the theme. The theme started
Yeah,
playing.
keep that in.
God damn it. It's also what the fuck. There's been a lot of scholarship about the Exorcist films and colonialism. I was reading an article that summarized a lot of this called by Kevin J. Wetmore Jr. called Colonial Possessions, a Fanonian reading of The Exorcist and its sequels. And he draws this connection between the possession of people and colonial possession. Draws a lot on Fanon, who of course was in addition to a anti-colonial theorist, was a psychologist. So he's connected to this in a number of ways. And he talks about how this film compared to Exorcist II, which focuses a lot on, because Father Marin, wait, do you guys hear something? Father Marin in the first film is, it's mentioned that he has encountered this demon once before in Africa.
Yes.
And it almost killed him. And so, obviously Africa, we get the specificity of Georgetown, not just Washington, D.C., but the Georgetown area of D.C. And then Africa, the entire continent is referred to very broadly. And so in Exorcist II, we get flashbacks to Marin's travels in what is basically Ethiopia, where he performs an exorcism on a young man named Kokumo, who is played later by James Earl Jones, which is cool because he talks in it. You get to hear his voice.
It's true.
And, there's a lot of, the central metaphor is of one of locusts, and like how locusts are, they're like evil grasshoppers, basically. They're grasshoppers with
they get turned
an
bad.
attitude.
Yeah.
But there's an idea that they can be turned good again. And I think Reagan is like the good locust or something, It's an interesting movie. But here, this is basically a retcon, because now this encounter with Pazuzu in Africa is moved from the Italian outpost of Ethiopia to the British outpost of Kenya. And here it's Cheche and not Kokumo. Cheche, a very... I don't want to be a phenotype guy, but he looks really different from everybody else in East Africa, this Filipino boy.
Yeah.
He's got like a mop top.
He's really... I mean, what do we think of Cheche as kind of a metaphor, and like, why is he the, vehicle of possession?
Well, so Schrader says that there was at least like just a practical consideration where to differentiate, he says there was a mandate of no pea soup and no head turning.
Mm-hmm.
And he says also to kind of separate it from the first film, they were thinking, well, in that film, you see the degradation of the body of a girl.
Yes. Yeah.
So in this one, how about the glorification of the body of a boy, which is the opposite of that. But as he notes, is also inherently narratively less interesting. To see a guy get better produces less urgency than seeing a girl get worse.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. There is also the uncomfortable... I mean, I think a lot of Western narratives about the backwardness of Africa or whatever point to ideas of misunderstandings of what in the West we would call disease that can be cured with medicine. It's pointed to as like, albinism is, I'm sure in some places treated as is stigmatized and people with physical differences are treated poorly, but like this is, I think, a go-to, like, pointing to the backwardness and ignorance of Africa to like point out how people with disabilities are treated there. So I feel like that's part of it.
I also have a Jake style Herculean stretch reading that I'm willing to try out here, which is that I believe
like Kellen Lutz in the film by Renny Harlin when he plays Hercules.
Great point. You're right. Had not considered this.
Give me
At the same time
reading.
that Kenyans were sort of struggling with British colonial authority, there are similar struggles in South and East Asia in British colonies, and sometimes there's strange situations where I think some Indian people would come to Africa.
Yeah. No, this was like the Uganda thing.
Yes,
primarily
exactly.
This was
I think even South Africa, I think had similar situations.
No, it happened in Kenya as well, because I think Du Bois talks about it, how
he
Indians,
does.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think they found themselves in an interesting position where obviously they'd sort of like been under colonial rule or had an established relationship for longer, and they were already pushing for rights in Indian national territory or future national territory. And then when they came to Africa, they were also sort of like in an independent rights struggle, sometimes even like representing themselves against the black natives as like sort of look how much more advanced we are. Or there was some Indians, as far as I understand it, who sort of took the side of colonial authority, as is the case. I mean, I think lots of colonial scholars have identified this in colonial history as a sort of like desperation way to get human treatment is to sort of side with this colonial authority. Our friend Fanon, I know, talks about this, and Memi and other people. But ultimately, I think what happens is that they end up becoming sort of united in the struggle for freedom here. But I think there is a question about the struggle for like the soul of these people, whether they will be tempted by selfish gain here against the well-being of indigenous Africans, or whether they will struggle together the harder way, the faithful way, to find their way out into, I don't know, clean living or something. I don't know if this tracks.
I mean, it's an admirable,
thank you,
Nemean lion of a theory.
Yeah, that's right. Certain Schrader was not thinking about this, but
no, but maybe I'm so baffled by the decision to include.
It's crazy.
Honestly,
it's crazy. Yeah.
The easiest explanation that I could think of is that whoever decided on Billy Crawford was racist and thought that they needed a lighter complected, less
very possible,
obviously black actor in this leading role. But
story wise, there's no reason why it can't be a black actor, as far as I know.
Yeah,
as I recall,
or at least like a genetically modified version of Mew.
And that is, Mew. And then in the Harlan version, it is one of the kids, kind of, but like I don't know. Those kids are such bad actors too, and like,
they are. One of them gets eaten by the CGI hyenas in a very extended and awful sequence.
It goes on forever.
Does.
Yeah, there is like this kind of, there's a suggestion that the evil is bubbling up everywhere, and we get that sequence with the kind of, I guess it would be the Aurora Equatorialis. I don't know what the fuck it's doing down there.
Yeah, behind Rachel, you're saying when she's walking around and stuff. Yeah,
and where the tensions are coming to a head between the Turkana people and the British. With shout out to Ralph Brown from Wayne's World 2, who plays the gruffer of the
sergeant major.
Yeah, and there's like that whole stupid sequence where he says like a old timey racial slur, and General Granville says, don't talk like that. But then he's also going to order the execution of
innocent people Kenyans for no reason. Yeah.
Well, I just think he would also have said the racial slur. Yeah. That's all.
I actually thought that was cool because I think that speaking of Democrats, that's the type of thing like we're being nice now, just so everybody knows. And then the guy who's more cleared eyed about what they're doing in Palestine or whatever is saying like, I mean, we think they're subhuman pieces of shit, right? And he's like, don't say that. But also the first time anything goes wrong, I'm absolutely going to justify massive genocidal force against these people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this is the first of the films to really engage with the notion, not only of like, because as this article and many others point out, so many possession films are about an otherized demon, usually from the Middle East, because that's like the origin of civilization, right? The origin of Christianity. But it's usually a demon from the Middle East coming to defile the body of a white woman in Connecticut or whatever.
Yeah.
And here it's Africa, which is maybe just kind of both an older site of human civilization and also the one that you can treat even worse in a Hollywood movie than the Middle East, perhaps.
Well, have you guys seen? It's only on the mind because I just saw it at Nighthawk on a rep screening. Have you heard of the Manitou? Do you know about this movie?
The Manitou rips. Dude. Yeah, I have the Manitou on Blu-ray behind me right now.
You do.
Amazing.
I've not seen it, but I know.
I saw it at a real beat up print
with Burgess Meredith.
And it's an Exorcist ripoff. And, instead of Max von Sydow, it's Tony Curtis. And instead of a priest, he's a, tarot card reader who wears like a wizard robe.
And it's like an indigenous Canadian, like a First Nations.
Yes, it's a First Nations little person that grows out of a woman's her tumor on her neck and then out of her full back. But I just thought of it because, I mean, it is an Exorcist ripoff, but it is interesting how some of these kind of creatures have these sort of undertones of like the, original, like what has been possessed by white imperialist culture.
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of a physicalization of guilt, of
colonial
guilt,
sin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, I guess, what I think Cecchi is doing. It is, I don't know, it strikes me the casting as one of those, like, just like weird ass producer things. They're just like, have you seen this guy? We gotta put him in the movie.
Maybe his daughter was really into Billy Crawford's music or something.
Right. 100%. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's like how Splash Mountain got built because Michael Eisner's son Breck was 12 and saw the model and was like, that looks cool.
Yeah.
Breck Eisner, of course, director of The Last Witch Hunter.
Yes.
You ever met Breck Eisner?
No.
Chad? You ever met Paul Schrader?
But kind of basically. I mean, like I'm friends with his former assistant Andrew Wonder, who now was the DP of O Canada.
That's right. Yeah.
And then Schrader will show up for a screening, and so he's been at a lot of stuff like at the Roxy and at other places. So I've sort of like been in the same room with him, like sort of bumped into him and stuff, and maybe shook his hand, but like never like had it. I don't know. I don't know what to talk about with people like that. Like, you know, it's hard to sort of. I love like your Chris work. Farley. I don't know. I mean, so yeah. I mean, sure. I've been in the vicinity of him. I love how he speaks about his work. He's always very funny, and he's in his that he doesn't give a fuck kind of era, which is great.
Yeah.
And
right.
But I haven't, you know, I heard, you know, Bilga talk about he had dinner with him, which sounds awesome, you know? Yeah.
It's, I don't know what I would talk to him about either. I would probably want to ask him about a bunch of stuff that isn't related to the Oops, All 2 Questions with Paul Schrader.
Okay, yeah.
You know? Paul, you ever been on Star Tours? You know, it did make me think, because he mentions in the in one of the interviews that he couldn't get, part of the reason he couldn't get Skarsgård back for ADR was that he was working on Pirates of the Caribbean at that point.
Yep.
Which just makes me want to ask Schrader a million questions about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. You know, like, I mean, he just posted about going to see Deadpool and Wolverine, the first hour of Deadpool and Wolverine.
He watches movies.
He wandered into it. I saw that as well.
He did, yeah. Yeah,
that's what's so fascinating about the guy, is that he at once seems like the most art cinema minded of the new Hollywood guys, and yet he's also like very commercially savvy, at least in terms of like, not that he's commercially savvy in a way that makes him a lot of money necessarily, but like he knows what position he occupies in the industry, and he knows, he's clear-eyed about how things work.
Well, I think that is really fascinating, and you know, he is savvy in the industry in terms of like has seen where the tides have turned, and the fact that he's able to get these like $3 or $4 million movies greenlit now that he has Final Cut over is pretty remarkable. And I think that there's a lot to be said for someone his age who is continuing to make, you know, uncompromising work within a sort of indie film space that most of which is full of not his peers at all. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that other sort of people from his generation and peer group that are no longer sort of commercially viable in the same way they ever were, like, you know, Walter Hill or John Milius or even like James Toback or whatever. Obviously, he has other problems, or Coppola. Yeah. Well, he's the other one that has put his money where his mouth is in the last 10 years and has actually made like smaller movies independently. Sure. You know, like Tetro is something you know, in the vein of what I'm talking about. But I just think that like a lot of those guys think about making a movie for $5 million and just have no fucking idea. Like, I'm too old, like I'm too old to do that. It's too hard. Right. They can't even conceive of something like that anymore. And to his credit, he's always pushed himself to do that. I mean, even to the point of, you know, I think his comeback kind of started with The Canyons, which is a movie that was made for allegedly $250,000, which is kind of amazing. Right. And like sort of coasted on bad publicity to notoriety. Right. And I don't know if it, you know, I'm sure I just think it, like I said, it got his name out there again as a sort of artistic force. So I've always kind of admired that about him. And, you know, he's working with young, you know, his DP is, you know, one of my peers, you know, who I've spoken to and met, and like, you know, he's not making some of the same mistakes of, you know, he's working with young crews that know the technology and know the working methods and et cetera. And I think that that's really smart. So it's amazing that for such an uncommercial kind of mind in many ways, he's made 25 features. It's kind of amazing.
I totally agree. And I will say that this film made me feel proud in a silly way of Paul Schrader. You know, I remember real mix of emotions about our friend, but because, like we've already said, it feels distinctly like a Paul Schrader film. It also feels maybe not, I mean, it doesn't feel as new as Pirates of the Caribbean, which to imagine that it's coming out in a year is crazy. But it does feel like at
That
the very
was the
least,
film
like
where they finally let me have all the barnacles and urchins that are on me. Normally, I didn't have to scrape them off for that one for the first time. Very relaxed working method.
he does seem like the
Thanks for
closest
stopping
human
by,
to a man
Stellan.
having death. Oh, thank you, Stellan. That's such a wow, what a treat. Yeah, I mean, it feels like at the very least like a late 90s Hollywood picture, right? So even though it's Schrader, it also feels like he's trying things. I mean, even Forever Mine, which our episode hasn't come out, but we agree with you, Chad, that is a pretty wild movie. But it doesn't feel like a 70s or an 80s movie. It feels like a 90s movie. And
If there's anything about that movie that can be said about that movie, it is clearly not giving anyone what they want just for the sake of it.
Yep.
You know,
but also not just doing Schrader because he doesn't want to grow, not doing old Schrader. Right? He does push himself and he brings in young actors and he sort of Clint style, like you're saying, does take people who he's worked with and now lets them have more control, at least a little bit, or it seems that way. So
Yeah, and like I think that, you know, I watched this movie and I understand why a studio would sort of balk at it, in that it's in his kind of plain style. Like he has a little bit of a, you know, withholding visual style, even though I think this movie is very handsomely mounted, obviously with Vittorio Storaro's cinematography, but like it's not like in your face in like this sort of like, you know, way that Renny Harlin's is. But it is just kind of baffling to me that they would, I mean, it's not so bad that they had to go through all of this.
No.
It's just kind of insane to me.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I have maybe a stupid question for our full-on movie producer guest.
Mhm. Yep.
So, for example, First Reformed made $3.5 million. Sorry, it made $4 internationally.
Worldwide, that's worldwide?
Worldwide, according to the numbers.com, it's $3.98 million worldwide. There are not $4 million worth of Paul Schrader heads in the world, right? So like
We got Ethan Hawke heads.
No,
It's
that one broke through. So like
Amanda Seyfried,
because I think Ethan Hawke, and because of A24's marketing, and because of the sort of overwhelming critical acclaim, you know what I mean?
Right.
I think if you want to look at how many Schrader heads there are in the world, look at how much The Master Gardener made.
Right. Yeah, I'm just curious about, like, you know, it's interesting to be Paul Schrader, and maybe we're just, you know, or I am, well, now the numbers is having a database problem. Anyway, I at least am probably blinded and too far into online film mind. But like, it's just fascinating to think about somebody like Paul Schrader who, you know, you might have to say he's the Taxi Driver guy, but that would impress basically most people who've seen movies, that he still is making movies that have to kind of appeal on the face of what movie should we see this afternoon. That's fascinating to me. Where like, I guess that's probably still true of Scorsese too, because like silence eats shit, right? Like you have to.
Right, but like silence still makes, I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn, but like, you know, that still makes 20 maybe, and that's a flop.
Right.
But like, you know, we're not really in the same sandbox here. Like Master Gardener didn't even make $1 million, you know, like, but as well, I think that they do well enough, and they're made cheaply, and, you know, between probably some foreign pre-sales and some VOD and sort of, you know, other streaming, whatever, like, no one's taking a huge bath on any of these.
Right.
And even like, you know, I think First Reformed like comfortably broke even, but like, you know, as you're seeing like with the trilogy, like it was definitely, I think, diminishing returns at a certain point where, you know, you go from A24 to Focus to Magnolia, and, you know, no offense to any of those great companies, but just in terms of reach and and kind of size, and, you know, obviously also First Reform got him his first Oscar nomination, which is insane.
Right.
I still don't know who fucked up getting him an original screenplay nomination for Taxi Driver or adapted for Affliction. Like both of these were very
Mishima or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but both of those were very Oscar-y movies. I mean,
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Already, where like Mishima, yes, I agree with you. And when I say a sort of plain style, I mean that one, that and Cat People definitely are counterexamples to that. But at
we
the
know
same
he has
time,
a range. Well, yeah. You're right. Yeah.
I should say too that, and I forgot to mention at the beginning in my starting to get into him is that really when I really started to get into him was in college when I read Transcendental Style and Film, which is still a text that I think about and look at movies through, and also to a degree the movies I direct through as well. And or at least it's always on mind, and really was instrumental in helping me understand Ozu, Dreyer, and Bresson.
It's crazy how that book still holds up for something he wrote as a 24-year-old.
It's crazy.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's crazy.
It is. It's incredible. I totally agree. I think you mentioned not maybe having a distorted perspective, Jake. I think I maybe spend more time with non-cinephiles than you do. And Martin Scorsese, I could ask a 60-year-old woman in Oaxaca and she might know who Martin Scorsese is. And I could also ask a 14-year-old and they might know who Martin Scorsese is.
Right,
Neither of those people probably know who Paul Schrader is. So when we're talking like orders of magnitude.
Sure.
We really are. I mean, like, in terms of even like someone like my dad, like who is a good sort of like probably Affliction is the only movie he would know. I did show him First Reformed, but other than that, like I can't think of him, knowing. And I think he would really like Blue Collar and maybe he remembers American Gigolo. That could be the only other one. But yeah, it's a big difference. But he's maintained his career by being sort of, I think, adept and, having big actors that want to work with him is always helpful. And then also like he's a writer. He generates his own material. And I think by his account, he writes and works pretty fast. So, that's a way to be able to get stuff made,
There is something incredible in one of these interviews. He mentions having written a script for Renny Harlin years prior to this.
Oh, wow.
Called Did you see this, Ian?
I did, yeah.
It was called The Speedboat King of Miami.
Whoa.
It sounds
awesome.
I gotta find this. We might have to dust off that bad boy.
Yeah, I mean, Miami Vice has never been hotter than it is right now, thanks to our friend Brandon Streisnig. So, like, it's time for some go fast boats in the cinema once again.
That is amazing. But, like, you hear about him, too, where it's like, about just generating material. I remember after First Reformed, he had announced and he was going to make a Western with Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe called 9 Men From Now, a riff on the Bud Bottcher title.
7 Men From Now, I think, yeah.
And called 7 Men From Now, which is amazing if you haven't seen it.
It is. Sure is.
And, it just, I think, Hawk dropped out and it fell apart, so he wrote something else.
Gotta get that
and
hopefully
he'll come back to it at some point. But I just think that he's able to kind of tell what he can get, the kind of thing he can get made right now, and then is able to write into that.
I think so. I mean, look, I would love to see 20 more movies from the guy. Although I don't want him to work any faster than he feels comfortable working. No. And speaking of which, speaking of the upcoming projects, I think we should address the sexual obsession check-in.
Oh, yes. Right. Yeah.
All right. So Paul Schrader, recently talking about an upcoming project, Non Compos Mentis, had this to say about the script.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's what I'm doing now.
So here on the show, we're just tracking which of Paul Schrader's films are not about sexual obsession. The number is, you know what? I think it actually might be a little lower. The percentage might be a little lower than I expected it to when we started doing this bit.
Maybe getting close to 60-40 at this point?
Probably 60-40 in favor
obsession,
of sexual
not
obsession.
Obsession. Yeah. Yep.
But I think this film is probably not about sexual obsession. I mean, Harlan's is the one that has the, your mother sucks cocks in hell stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that was really shoehorned in. No, it's even worse. It's like she says, like, "Do you want to fuck my juicy ass?" or whatever.
She does say
like,
that, I believe. Yeah.
It's pretty cringe. But yeah, I would say
that's going on the soundboard, by the way.
Oh, good.
You saying that?
Good. Please do. I do not think this movie is about sexual obsession.
I do not either.
I think that's.
You did just do autofocus, though, right?
Yeah.
That one.
Maybe
it's about a clinical sexual obsession. Yeah.
Yeah, I think even the original Exorcist has a better claim of being about sexual obsession because one of the other things is this like person reaching puberty and what that what that means for a young person discovering her mother's sexuality and stuff.
One of the biggest things cut out of the novel or removed from the novel for the film is that in the novel Reagan has almost perpetual diarrhea. This is real.
Okay.
So she's peeing out soup and shitting and diarrheaing out her butt.
Yeah.
Also soup.
I guess so. Yeah. Hey, sometimes, why bother distinguishing? You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Man.
So I think he said did he say the sexual obsession thing at like the Patty Hearst screening?
I think
maybe?
it was the Patty Hearst screening. Were you there?
Yeah.
No, I did not go to that one because I had seen the movie. But yes, that's a great quote for someone that is really adept at talking about his own work and history.
Well, I mean, we've talked about it. I think he might just have a very specific conception of what sexual obsession is,
right,
as opposed to romantic obsession or whatever. But
yeah, he's not one of these directors who you ask him about his films. He says, "I don't even remember making that" or something. He's keenly
not
aware.
Stephen King.
Right, in a positive and I mean, they both were doing a lot of coke, and I think probably about the same time period. But
yeah,
Paul Schrader kept it together.
Mm-hmm. Dodged the van. That happened like so much more recently than you would think. That happened in like 2009 or something. All right, so it's not about sexual obsession.
I think it's a no.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I think so. Now, Chad, speaking of producers, speaking of heavy-handed, diabolical producers, you've got a film that you've diabolically produced that's in cinemas now. Is that correct? Is that right?
Thanks for the easy segue there. I recently produced a movie called CRUMB CATCHER. That's a kind of darkly comic thriller. And I produced it with Larry Fessenden and his indie outfit Glass Eye Pix, who we love.
Star of Bringing Out the Dead.
Yes,
by the way.
Exactly.
Who appears in Bringing Out the Dead and Killers of the Flower Moon. And it premiered at Fantastic Fest last year. And
they only let in movies that are fantastic at that festival.
Exactly.
That's an incredible stamp.
So yeah, it's a kind of movie about a sort of harebrained blackmail plot that goes super awry. I'm trying to think of the Paul Schrader movie it most resembles. Maybe a sort of combination between Patty Hearst and autofocus. I haven't seen Witch Hunt, so it might have a little flavor of that. I'm not sure.
I don't think
do
so.
that to yourself.
I wouldn't say that about the film.
The dials are going down with that comparison. So I don't know. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but we got a. It's a tiny movie that we got, and we got a nationwide, theatrical release for it, which is very rare, and we're really proud of that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And so it's playing. It might still be playing in your local Alamo Drafthouse, but if not, on August 20th, it is gonna be released on digital for rental. So look out for that. It's gotten great reviews. It's a really funny, dark, crazy, entertaining movie with some great performances. So we're proud of it.
I'm very excited.
So cool. Yeah.
And if we find out that you listened to this episode and you didn't see CRUMB CATCHER,
this is sickening.
we're sending Pazuzu to your house.
Yep.
Sorry to say.
Mm-hmm.
And you are getting the diarrhea thing. So, you know. I'm pumped. That sounds extremely up my alley.
Yes.
That's squarely in the wheelhouse of film types that I like to watch. So,
Yep. Agreed.
really exciting. And also, you know, we love to feel like Jay Leno having somebody on to promote a real project. The only guy who has people on to promote stuff. And currently. All right. Well, I think that's about the end of our episode on Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. Do you guys see this Australian breakdancer? I know this is not going to age well, but I have to talk about somebody.
I was thinking about we talked about the Hawk to a Girl, and then the episode came out like 3 weeks after everybody stopped caring about it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, that's... Ian, you're very kind to say we talked about the Hawk to a Girl.
That's true.
Talked about the...
Yeah.
It was like the day I had seen it, and it was still funny to me. But
Sure.
did you see this
Why
Australian
would you do this
breakdancer?
again?
I just can't believe it.
This guy
It's
doesn't learn.
Anyway. And also, can you believe what happened in the Red Wedding on Game of Thrones? All right,
Have you guys seen this dress? This crazy dress? Yeah.
What freaking color is it? Well, thanks, Chad, for being on the show. Remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. Helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad. Carve Podcast Deformity into your chest with a piece of glass. I think that happens in the Renny Harlin one. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcast Deformity. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a two-person Paul Schrader podcast, you can email us at podcastdeformity@gmail.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. We will be back next week with The Walker.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Which
The Walker.
I hear things. I hear that might be kind of good.
Interesting movie. It's movie? Definitely one of his man in room movies. And
okay, great.
Yeah, spoiler: it is about sexual obsession. That one is.
Oh shit, that's exciting.
Suspected as much. I got to tell you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, until then, as the star of The Walker once said, "Let there be carnage."
Bye.